After my dad, a famous composer, passed away, my husband's family said I should tone down the grief at his funeral because it was making their brunch uncomfortable. When I heard his aunt whisper, "She's so dramatic, bet she's just after his royalties," I grabbed my violin and played one last song, for them. They all cried, but not for the reason you'd think. Yesterday, during what was supposed to be the hardest, most private moment of my life, my father's funeral, my husband Brandon and his family completely shattered whatever was left of my trust in them. Before the service even started, Brandon leaned toward me and muttered, "Can you please not make a scene today? Mom has brunch reservations." I stared at him, thinking maybe I misheard, but then his Aunt Melanie, sitting right behind us, whispered not quietly enough, "She's so dramatic. Bet she's just crying over the royalties." I heard it. Everyone close by heard it. Something inside me snapped. Instead of confronting them with words, I got up, walked to my violin case, and played a piece my father had written in his final days, a piece so raw that it tore through the room like a scream no one could ignore. They cried. But not for my father. I'm Allison, 38, and until recently, I thought my life was fairly stable. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, in this cozy old house that always smelled like worn leather, wood polish, and sheet music. My dad, Henry Reed, was a composer, not mainstream famous, but known enough in the indie film and orchestral world that his work got used in places like the Portland Symphony and small films that would win Sundance Awards. After my mom passed when I was 12, Dad raised me alone. We were everything to each other. He was a quiet man, but he could tell whole stories just through his music. Growing up, I played the violin, he taught me himself. We'd sit on the porch in the summer evenings and play duets, me, scraping awkwardly at first, and him, patient and encouraging. I met my husband Brandon when I was 27. I was working at a coffee shop while finishing a music therapy degree. He came in one rainy afternoon, ordered a cappuccino, stayed for 2 hours chatting, and then came back every single day until I agreed to go out with him. He was charming, easygoing in a way I wasn't. I was all nerves and old soul energy, he was all casual jokes and smiles. I fell hard, maybe because it felt like relief after years of focusing only on dad and school and scraping by. When we got married, I met his family properly for the first time. And let me tell you, I should have paid more attention. His mother, Elaine, was the type who had a favorite spa for every day of the week. His Aunt Melanie was worse, she had this permanently judgmental little smirk, like she was smelling something unpleasant wherever she went. They weren't openly rude. Not exactly. It was all little things, calling my violin playing a cute hobby, constantly suggesting Brandon and I get serious and invest in real estate or start thinking about the bigger picture. Translation: Brandon should make more money, and I should stop embarrassing them with my artsy nonsense. Still, I told myself they meant well, that it was just a difference in values. I was wrong. Last year, my dad's health started to fail. It was cruel watching him fade. The man who could sit at a piano for 8 straight hours now struggled to remember if he'd eaten breakfast. I spent every free moment at the hospital in Portland. Brandon came once or twice but always seemed uncomfortable, tapping at his phone, murmuring about meetings he had to get back to. When Dad finally passed this spring, my world just broke. He died holding my hand. I sat there long after he was gone, the hospital room buzzing and cold around me, thinking how crap it was that the world could keep turning without him. I handled everything, the funeral, the will, the estate. Dad had been organized, bless him. He left me everything, his house, his copyrights, his small but steady royalties. That's when the Taylors suddenly became extremely interesting. Elaine called to offer guidance on managing Dad's music catalog. Aunt Melanie stopped by, hinting about smart investments and how it was important not to let sudden money ruin your life. Brandon? He shrugged. They're just trying to help, babe. Don't be so defensive. I tried to block it all out and focus on planning the funeral. I chose First Presbyterian in downtown Portland, this gorgeous old stone church Dad had loved. I arranged for a small string quartet to play some of his favorite pieces before the service. I decided I would play one final piece myself, something Dad and I had worked on in secret, a piece he'd called The Crying Willow. The morning of the funeral, everything felt unreal. I barely got dressed. I sat in front of the mirror trying to do my makeup, but my hands were shaking so badly I gave up. Brandon watched, frowning. "You look really pale," he said. "Maybe tone it down a little? Mom's worried about the brunch after." I blinked at him, not sure I heard correctly. "The brunch after," he repeated, like that was the real event. We rode to the church mostly in silence. Every so often, he would check his watch or fidget. I was too numb to say anything. At the church, I could feel the Taylors the second we walked in. Elaine in a cream-colored suit that looked more suited to a wedding than a funeral. Melanie whispered behind a gloved hand to another cousin. No one from their side of the family looked sad. They looked mildly inconvenienced. The service started. I somehow made it through my eulogy, my voice cracking halfway through when I talked about Dad teaching me that music could say the things words couldn't. As I sat down, trembling, I heard it. Aunt Melanie, whispering, but not quietly enough, "She's so dramatic. Bet she's just after his royalties." I froze. I stared at the wood grain of the pew in front of me, trying to breathe, while my heart thundered painfully against my ribs. I thought maybe, Brandon would react. That he would defend me. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably and stared straight ahead like he hadn't heard anything. That's when something inside me broke. I couldn't sit there, pretending this was normal. I stood up. I walked to the front of the church, ignoring the minister's startled whisper. I opened my violin case, pulled out my instrument, and tuned it with hands that felt ice cold. And then I played. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't explain. I didn't look at anyone except for one brief second, enough to catch Melanie's smirk falter and Elaine's polite funeral mask start to crack. I raised the bow. I closed my eyes. And I played The Crying Willow. It wasn't a polished performance. It wasn't pretty. It was raw, uneven in places, and full of so much grief that even I could barely breathe through it. The opening notes sliced the air, thin, trembling, almost too soft to hear, but then the melody deepened, turned heavier, almost angry. Every memory, every late night sitting by Dad's hospital bed, every bitter moment when Brandon hadn't come, every fake smile from his family, it all poured out through my violin. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to accuse. The music did it for me. The church, so echoey and vast, seemed to trap the sound and spin it back at them, louder, sharper. Even the walls seemed to hum with the weight of it. By the time I finished, there was complete silence. No coughs. No fidgeting. No polite murmurs. Just silence, heavy, suffocating, and a sea of faces that finally looked shaken. Elaine was dabbing her eyes, but not because she missed my father. Melanie stared at the floor, twisting a tissue between her fingers. Brandon looked like he wanted to sink into the pew and disappear. I put the violin back in its case, snapped the clasp shut carefully, and walked back to my seat without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake anymore. The rest of the service blurred past. I heard people speaking, moving, getting up. I heard the organist start some hymn Dad had chosen. I don't remember singing. I don't remember much of anything after that. When it was over, there was the reception, one of those muted celebration of life gatherings where people awkwardly balance paper plates of finger food and try to say meaningful things while hovering near the exits. I stood off to the side, next to a table full of Dad's old compositions and photographs, trying to catch my breath. Elaine floated over first, of course. Always knowing when to swoop in. "You really have such a gift, dear," she said, her voice thick with that fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Your father would have been proud." She gave me a quick, dry hug, the kind you give an acquaintance, not family, and then launched into how the brunch plans had unfortunately fallen through, but maybe it was for the best, considering the emotional tone of the day. I nodded stiffly. I didn't trust myself to speak. Brandon found me about 20 minutes later, lurking by the photo boards. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. "It was a lot." I stared at him. "You didn't have to do anything," I said, just as quietly. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Look, I get that you're upset. But you embarrassed them, Allison. You embarrassed me." That was when I knew, with total clarity, that we weren't just grieving different things. We were living completely different realities. My husband wasn't mourning the man who raised me, taught me to find beauty in everything, gave me every scrap of love he had. He was mourning his own discomfort. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was a huge, aching emptiness where my marriage used to be, and all I could think was, I am alone in this room full of people. I made it through the rest of the reception on autopilot. Shaking hands, smiling weakly, accepting condolences from Dad's colleagues, a few of my old music teachers, some neighbors from Eugene who'd driven all the way up. Real people. People who knew him. Meanwhile, the Taylors huddled by the exit, checking their phones, tapping their watches. When it was finally over, I sat alone in my car for a long time, the engine off, my hands in my lap, just staring at nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon, headed to Mom's to decompress. "You okay?" I stared at the screen. I didn't answer. I don't remember driving home. I must have, because I ended up in our driveway, sitting there with the headlights slicing across the garage door, the world outside dim and gray under Portland's endless drizzle. Inside the house, it smelled like Brandon's cologne and the burnt remains of a microwave dinner he must have made the night before. I stood just inside the doorway, wet from the rain, holding my keys like I didn't recognize them. Everything felt wrong. Too big. Too empty. Too full of someone else's life. I didn't want to be there. Not in that house. Not in that marriage. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brandon. "Babe, you coming to Mom's? Everyone's asking about you." I stared at the message so long the screen went dark. Then I turned off my phone and left it face down on the kitchen counter. I went upstairs. Changed out of the black funeral dress that suddenly felt like a costume. When I passed the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Pale. Hollow-eyed. Older somehow. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, maybe, but I couldn't imagine explaining all of it. How do you tell someone that the person you married, the family you tried to love, had managed to make even your father's funeral about themselves? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I sat on the couch in sweatpants, a blanket around my shoulders, the TV playing some old movie I wasn't really watching. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't tired. I just was. Around 10, the front door opened. Brandon's voice floated through the house. "Allison? Are you here?" I didn't answer. A few seconds later, he wandered into the living room, loosening his tie, looking tired and slightly annoyed, like someone who had dealt with a long, inconvenient day at work. He dropped onto the other end of the couch with a sigh. "Well, that was a disaster," he said lightly, almost joking. "Mom's still trying to process." I said nothing. The blanket tightened around my shoulders. He waited a few beats, then leaned toward me. "Look, I get that today was hard. For everyone. But maybe next time," he stopped himself, probably realizing how that sounded, then started again. "Maybe you just needed to get it out. And now we can start moving on." Moving on. Like it was that simple. Like I had scraped my knee on the playground and just needed a band-aid and a lollipop. I turned my head to look at him, really look. The man I had married. The man who had stood by while his family whispered poison at my father's funeral. The man who hadn't said a word in my defense. Brandon mistook my silence for agreement, because he smiled a little and reached for my hand. I pulled it back. He blinked, confused. "Allison," he said, his voice shifting slightly, annoyed now, defensive. "I'm trying here. I get that you're upset. But you have to meet me halfway. We have a life. Bills. A mortgage. Plans. We can't just fall apart every time something bad happens. Every time something bad happens. Like burying the only parent I had left with some minor setback." I stood up. The blanket slid off my shoulders and pooled on the floor. "I'm going to bed," I said. His mouth opened like he was about to argue, but he thought better of it. He shrugged and turned back to the TV, already tuning me out. I climbed the stairs feeling heavier with each step, like gravity had increased just for me. I crawled into bed without brushing my teeth, without changing clothes, without even pulling back the covers. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the thud of my heartbeat in my throat. At some point, I heard him come up to bed. The mattress shifted under his weight. He smelled like aftershave and cheap wine. He didn't touch me. Didn't say goodnight. Just rolled over and started snoring softly. The tears came then. Silent, endless. Not just for Dad. Not just for the funeral. But for the cold, yawning space that had opened up between me and the life I thought I had. I cried until the pillow was wet beneath my cheek, until my throat hurt from holding back the sounds, until I couldn't cry anymore and just lay there, blinking into the dark. When I woke up the next morning, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the dishwasher downstairs. I lay there for a long time, staring at the pale light creeping across the ceiling, feeling that same weight pressing down on my chest. Eventually I dragged myself out of bed and went to the bathroom. I looked wrecked. Puffy eyes, pale skin, hair tangled and flattened on one side. The kind of face you instinctively turn away from, even if it's your own. Downstairs, Brandon was already dressed, jeans, collared shirt, sneakers, like it was just any Saturday morning. He was scrolling through his phone at the kitchen counter, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in front of him. When he heard me, he looked up. "Morning," he said. "Neutral. Too neutral." I nodded. Went to the sink. Poured myself a glass of water, even though my stomach turned at the thought of drinking it. He watched me for a minute, then set his phone down. "So, Mom's thinking of hosting a family dinner tomorrow," he said casually, like he was offering weekend plans. "Sort of a reset after everything. She wants you there, obviously." I blinked at him. "A reset?" I said. He shrugged, uncomfortable. "You know. Get things back on track. Put all the emotions behind us. All the emotions behind us." As if grief had an expiration date. As if mourning my father, the man who shaped my entire world, was just some awkward emotional outburst they all had to politely endure until I snapped out of it. I didn't answer. Just sipped my water and looked out the window, where the gray clouds sagged low over the trees. Brandon waited a beat, then pushed a little. "Allison. Come on. Don't punish everyone because you're hurting." My hand tightened around the glass. I set it down carefully before it could slip and shatter. "Punish everyone," I repeated quietly. He flushed a little, realizing how it sounded. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. I think Dad wouldn't want you wallowing, you know? He'd want you to celebrate his life, move on." He said it like he knew my father. Like he had any right to speak for him. I turned away so he wouldn't see the look on my face. Brandon sighed, clearly annoyed now. "Jesus, Allison. I'm trying. But you're making this really hard." I didn't reply. Didn't trust myself either. Instead, I went upstairs again, moving slowly, deliberately, like my body had to think through every step. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, breathing shallowly. Some part of me, the part that still clung to old habits, old hopes, wanted to believe this was just a bad patch. Maybe Brandon didn't know how cruel he sounded. Maybe he was just overwhelmed, too. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't struggling under the weight of grief like I was. He was irritated. Inconvenienced. Embarrassed that his wife had made a scene with her emotions and her violin and her inconvenient pain. And the worst part? He didn't even understand why that hurt more than anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at my bare feet, feeling the threadbare carpet under my toes. The house felt colder somehow. Or maybe it was just me. The memories from the day before kept flashing in my mind, the smug little look Melanie had given me, the way Elaine had smiled tightly through her fake tears, the way Brandon had pulled away like he couldn't stand the weight of my grief pressing down on him. I thought about the funeral. About the music. About the way the church had gone so still, so silent, when I played. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like crying. I felt empty. Hollowed out. A slow, quiet certainty settled over me. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. I didn't want to go to a family dinner. I didn't want to reset. I didn't want to patch over something that was broken in ways Brandon couldn't even see. I sat there for a long time, unmoving, while the morning slid past outside. Eventually, I heard Brandon downstairs, grabbing his keys, calling up half-heartedly, "I'm heading out. Text me if you want to come later." The front door slammed. His car pulled out of the driveway. Silence. For the first time in days, the house truly felt still. I sat there, alone, letting the weight of it all settle over me. And for the first time, I didn't fight it. The rest of the weekend passed in slow motion. Brandon texted a few more times, "Coming to dinner? Mom's making her famous lasagna. You'll feel better if you're around family." Family. The word felt hollow. I didn't respond. I didn't go. I stayed curled up in the house, feeling the storm inside me gather strength. Sunday night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of me, the same kind Dad used to sketch out musical phrases. And I made 2 lists: what my life had become, what I wanted it to be. It was the first honest conversation I had with myself in years. Brandon came home late from the Taylor dinner, smelling faintly of wine and aftershave, and when he found me still at the table, he frowned. "You're still mad," he said, like it was a childish phase I was stubbornly clinging to. I didn't argue. I didn't even look at him. I just kept writing. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not one of Brandon's family's golfing buddies. No. I found a woman named Nora Kim, a tough-as-nails divorce attorney based in downtown Portland, known for being discreet and ruthless when needed. I scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. While Brandon was at work, I pulled out my violin, the one thing in the house that still felt truly mine, and packed it carefully into its hard case. I grabbed my laptop, the folder of Dad's original copyrights and estate documents, and a few clothes. Everything else, the furniture, the silverware from Elaine's registry, the framed family photos, could rot. Before I left, I taped a note to the refrigerator: "I'm not coming back. I need a life where grief isn't treated like an inconvenience. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. For the next few weeks, I stayed with a friend in Eugene, the kind of friend you don't have to explain yourself to. Carmen had been there through everything: high school orchestra competitions, Dad's long hospital stays, even late-night sobfests after Brandon and I had our first real fights. She barely blinked when I showed up on her porch with a violin case and a tired smile. "Stay as long as you need," she said, simply. While the divorce papers were drafted, I got to work. First, I met with a music rights consultant who helped me untangle Dad's royalties from the mess Brandon's family had tried to dip their fingers into. Turns out Dad had been smarter than any of them realized. He'd updated his estate the year before he died, locking it up tighter than Fort Knox. All the music. All the future royalties. Every penny. Mine. No contest. Next, I contacted a few local arts programs in Eugene. I started teaching violin to kids who couldn't afford private lessons, a project Dad and I had always dreamed about doing someday. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines. But it filled something inside me that had been empty for a long, long time. As for Brandon, he didn't take it well. At first, he tried calling, texting, begging me to talk it out. When that didn't work, he got angry, accusing me of abandoning him, saying I was overreacting. And when that didn't work, when the papers hit his desk and he realized this was happening whether he liked it or not, he panicked. Tried to get his mother involved. Elaine called me once, trying to sound warm and maternal. "Allison, dear, let's be reasonable. Surely you don't want to drag all this out. Think about how this looks." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just calmly informed her that I had no interest in any of the Taylor assets. That all I wanted was my father's estate, which was legally, irrevocably, mine. And that as far as I was concerned, the rest of them could sort out their brunch reservations without me from now on. Click. They didn't call again after that. The divorce finalized quickly. No contest. No messy courtroom battles. Brandon kept the house, the mortgage, the maintenance, the memories. I kept my peace. And the best part? Without me, without any claim to Dad's royalties, Brandon's dreams of investments dried up faster than cheap cement. No fancy family dinners. No easy money. Just a middle-aged man stuck with a crumbling house he couldn't afford on his own. Meanwhile, I built something real. I opened a tiny music school in Eugene, Reed School of Strings. The first session sold out in a week. Parents drove from all over the county to bring their kids who reminded me of myself at their age, hopeful, awkward, full of music that needed someone to believe in it. Sometimes, late at night, after the last student packed up their violin, I would sit alone in the little converted church-turned school and play the Crying Willow softly to the empty room. Not out of sadness. Not anymore. Out of gratitude. Out of love. Out of freedom. Because in the end, the Taylors didn't win. They lost the one thing they couldn't ever buy, a real family. A real legacy. A real heart. And me? I didn't just survive them. I outgrew them.